Christmas Eve, 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodder family, a father, a mother, and 10 children, celebrated the holiday together. The younger kids stayed up past bedtime playing with new toys their older sister had surprised them with. By 1:30 in the morning, the house was on fire. George and Jennie Sodder escaped with 4 of their children. The other 5 were trapped upstairs. When the fire was over, searchers expected to find remains. They found nothing. No bones, no teeth, no trace of 5 children. And in the decades that followed, the evidence would suggest something far worse than a house fire. George Sodder was born Giorgio Soddu in Sardinia, Italy, in 1895. He came to America as a young man, settling in the coal country of West Virginia. He married Jennie Cipriani, also an Italian immigrant, in 1922. Together, they built a life and a large family, 10 children in all. George ran a trucking business and did well. He was hardworking, outspoken, and fiercely proud of his adopted country. And he was vocal about one thing in particular, his hatred for Benito Mussolini and the fascist government ruling his homeland. In small-town West Virginia, where many Italian families still had ties to the old country, those opinions made enemies. In the months before Christmas 1945, strange things began happening around the Sodder home. A man showed up claiming to look for work. He wandered into the backyard, pointed at the fuse boxes on the house, and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." Then a life insurance salesman came to the door. George turned him down. The man grew angry and said, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." George's older sons also noticed something. A strange car parked along the highway near their home. Day after day, the people inside sat watching the younger Sodder children as they walked home from school. On December 24th, the family celebrated together. Marion, the oldest daughter, had bought toys for her younger sisters. Martha, 12, Jennie, 8, and Betty, just 5 years old. The younger children were so excited they begged to stay up late. Their mother agreed, as long as the 2 oldest boys still awake, 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis, remembered to feed the chickens and put the cows in before bed. Jennie went upstairs around 10 o'clock, carrying 3-year-old Sylvia. At 12:30 in the morning, the phone rang. Jennie went downstairs to answer. It was a woman she didn't recognize, asking for someone she'd never heard of. In the background, laughter and clinking glasses. The woman gave a weird laugh and hung up. Jennie noticed the lights were still on and the curtains hadn't been drawn, things the children always took care of. She assumed they'd gone up to the attic where they slept. She turned out the lights, closed the curtains, and went back to bed. At 1 a.m., she was awakened by a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling sound, then silence. Half an hour later, she woke again. This time, she smelled smoke. The fire was burning in George's office, near the telephone line and fuse box. Jennie woke George. He woke the older children. George, Jennie, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr. made it out. They screamed up to the attic where the 5 younger children slept. No response. George tried to go back inside, but the stairway was engulfed. He ran outside, barefoot in the snow, and tried to climb the outside wall. He smashed a window and cut his arm. Then he went for the ladder he always kept leaning against the house. It was gone. He tried to use the 2 coal trucks parked nearby to reach the upper floor. Neither would start. They had both worked perfectly that afternoon. Marion ran to the neighbors to call the fire department. The phone was dead. The Fayetteville Fire Department was only 2 miles away. They didn't arrive until 8 in the morning. By then, the house had burned to its foundation. When the ashes cooled, the fire chief and his men searched the ruins. In a house fire that kills 5 people, especially children, you expect to find remains, bones, teeth, something. They found nothing. The fire chief, F.J. Maurice, told the family he hadn't found any bones. He suggested the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate 5 human bodies. But fire experts would later point out that a residential house fire doesn't burn hot enough to destroy bones entirely. Even crematoriums, which burn at over 1,700 degrees for hours, leave fragments behind. The local coroner held an inquest the next day. The ruling: accidental fire caused by faulty wiring. And here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Sitting on that coroner's jury was the same life insurance salesman who had told George his house would burn down and his children would be destroyed. Death certificates were issued for the 5 children on December 30th, 1945. George and Jennie Sodder refused to accept the official story, and the more they looked, the more the evidence pointed away from an accidental fire. A telephone repairman examined the phone line. It hadn't been burned through in the fire. It had been deliberately cut. Someone had climbed 14 feet up the pole and severed it. The missing ladder was found months later, at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet from the house. Someone had moved it before the fire. A bus driver who passed through Fayetteville late on Christmas Eve told police he had seen people throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house. When the snow melted that spring, young Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green rubber object in the brush near the house. George recognized it immediately. It looked like a pineapple bomb, a military incendiary device. And the bones? Years later, the Sodders hired a pathologist to examine small bone fragments that had been found at the site. The conclusion? They were not from children. They came from a male, somewhere between 16 and 22 years old. Someone had planted them there. George and Jennie spent the rest of their lives looking for their children. They hired private detectives. They printed thousands of flyers with the children's photos, offering a $5,000 reward, then doubled it to $10,000. In the early 1950s, they erected a billboard along Route 16 in Fayetteville, right where their house had stood. 5 faces stared out at every passing car with the words, "What was their fate? Kidnapped, murdered, or are they still alive?" The FBI took the case, treating it as a possible interstate kidnapping. After 2 years of dead-end leads, they dropped it. A woman in a Charleston hotel told police she had seen the children, shortly after the fire, being escorted by 2 men and 2 women, all of whom appeared to be Italian. Another lead came from St. Louis, where a woman wrote to say the oldest girl, Martha, was living in a convent. None of these leads were ever confirmed, and none of the private detectives the Sodders hired ever delivered answers. Then in 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jennie Sodder opened her mailbox and found a letter. It was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph of a young man roughly 30 years old. He had dark hair, strong features. He looked strikingly like Louis Sodder, who would have been around 30 if he had survived. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. E lil boys. A90132 or 35. The family had no idea what the numbers meant. They hired yet another private detective to investigate the letter's origins in Central City. He disappeared, never reported back. The Sodders could not find him. They added the photograph to the billboard. They hung an enlargement over their fireplace, and they kept waiting. George Sodder died in 1969, still believing his children were alive. Jennie died in 1989. The billboard stood along Route 16 until shortly after her death. For nearly 40 years, 5 faces watched the cars go by, asking a question that was never answered. The surviving Sodder children, and now their grandchildren, have continued to publicize the case. They believe the Sicilian mafia was trying to extort money from George, and that someone who knew about the planned arson took the children from the house before the fire was set, promising they would be safe. No remains of the 5 children have ever been found. No one was ever arrested. No one ever confessed. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, Betty. 5 children vanished on Christmas Eve, 1945. And 80 years later, no one knows what happened to them.